Princeton. Today, the word calls to mind thoughts of a college town, with shops and restaurants lining the streets. It's hard to imagine this peaceful scene ravaged by war, but in fact, this town was once the setting of an important battle that served as the turning point in the Revolutionary War. This is the place where more than 2 centuries ago, on January 3rd, 1777, the Americans took a stand against the British, who were garrisoned in Nassau Street. All Americans are somewhat familiar with the Revolutionary War, if only for its most iconic moments. For example, the Delaware Crossing's artistic reproduction is an image that any citizen can recognize. However, the crossing did not change the course of the war. The Battle of Princeton, although less well known, marked a transformation in the Continental Army and a turning point in the Revolutionary War. In this battle, for the first time, the Continental Army stood firm against the might of the British regulars and gained a decisive victory, and the upper hand in the war. In the autumn of 1776, the British regulars were contemptuous of the ragtag Continentals. Prospects for the American colony's independence grew dim. Within the space of a few weeks, George Washington's Continental Army went from a position of strength to one of desperation on the Pennsylvania banks of the Delaware River. The British had defeated the Americans in the battles of Bunker Hill, Fort Washington, Quebec, and Long Island. After the Battle of Fort Lee on November 20th, 1776, the British drove the Americans into a general retreat. In their following occupation of New Jersey, the British fortified and garrisoned towns along the main road, including Princeton. This allowed them to gather provisions from a wider area, but also made them susceptible to attack. Washington would take advantage of this in the Battle of Princeton. General William Howe expected that his string of victories would discourage the Americans from continuing to fight, and ordered his army into winter quarters on December 14, 1776. He believed that winter weather and the dispirited condition of the Continental Army would help protect his exposed forces. On December 26th, the Continentals had attacked Trenton. It was their first major victory in the war, although it was fought against Hessian mercenaries, not British regulars. The victory boosted morale, and it also brought the soldier trade in Europe into question and lowered the British esteem of the Hessians' military ability. However, it didn't serve as a turning point in the war. That would happen a week later, at Princeton. After Washington's victory, Major General William Howe, the leader of the British troops, was deeply concerned. He immediately marshaled 8,000 men as well as 28 artillery guns under Major General Charles Cornwallis. Howe's instructions were simple: find the tired rebel army, strike quickly, and destroy it. Howe saw the current state of the Continental Army as a chance for a quick resolution to the war. Howe was right in his estimation of the Continental Army. Many of the Continentals' enlistments had run out on December 30th. They were tired, cold, and more than ready to return home. Many of them were still wearing summer clothing, which had been reduced to rags by hard campaigning. Washington managed to convince half of his men to stay on for an additional 6 weeks by promising a bounty of $10 to each. Even with these men staying past their enlistments, the British force was larger than any Washington could muster. Washington decided to send an advance force, roughly 1,000 men and a battery of about 6 guns, to delay Cornwallis. This force, departing on the night of New Year's Eve, occupied a position about 6 miles from Princeton. This location, referred to as the Pass, was where the highway leading to Princeton crossed a small stream. Fighting broke out the morning of January 1st, and the Americans inflicted heavy casualties on British light infantry and 2 companies of Hessians. The British and Hessian forces eventually cleared the pass, but suffered about 140 casualties, while the Americans are recorded to have 4 men killed. The British now knew that the American army was out in strength, fighting well on good ground, holding their positions, inflicting casualties on picked troops, and taking few losses in return. Even if the regulars won the ground, as they did in the conflict at the pass, it would be at a high cost. Cornwallis and his men did not reach the American lines until 5 p.m. on January 2nd. The Continentals, led by Edward Hand, had utilized hit-and-run tactics as well as skillful use of artillery to delay the British. This forced Cornwallis to wait until the next morning to destroy the American army, which was pinned between the British forces and the Delaware River. This gave Washington enough time to come up with a strategy that would not only enable him to escape his predicament, but win another important victory. Washington plotted an overnight escape. He left 400 men behind and snuck around the side of the British camp. This allowed him to slip his entire army around the British flank to the nearby and lightly defended Princeton. Washington and the main body of his army departed at around 1 in the morning. All of this sets the scene for the consequent battle. Princeton was defended by some 1,700 British regulars under Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mahood. On the morning of January 3, 1777, the American troops split into two wings after crossing Stony Brook. The left wing, led by Nathaniel Greene, marched west on a sunken road along the bed of Stony Brook to the highway separating Trenton and Princeton. Their object was to seize control of the highway, preventing the British from fleeing Princeton and also stopping them from sending reinforcements. The main body of the army, led by Sullivan and numbering about 5,000 men, went north towards the rear of the college on Sawmill Road. They were to deliver the main attack. This battle used a similar strategy as in the Battle of Trenton, an approach in two separate columns, one which attacked in the most obvious line and the other which made the main assault from another direction. Both relied heavily on the element of surprise. Another similarity was the use of artillery as assault weapons and the placement of inexperienced units between veterans. These emerging patterns are evidence that this conflict helped shape and define the Americans' way of war. It was not long before their approach was perceived by the British. Colonel Mahood, who had been leading a column to Trenton with cavalry, artillery, replacements, and supplies, discovered the Americans at about 8 a.m. He decided to attack and led his smaller column directly towards the main body of the Americans. It became clear that the British were moving on converging lines with Greene's left wing. Washington alerted Greene to this, and Greene ordered Mercer to lead his brigade towards the British force. Thinking it was only a small enemy detachment, Mercer led only about 120 men into William Clark's orchard. Although the Americans initially had the upper hand, Captain Hale of the British ordered a bayonet charge, preying on the fact that the Continentals had only slow-firing rifles. This charge broke the American line and cost them their leader. Mercer suffered 7 bayonet wounds and would later die at the William Clark House, a structure beside the orchard where British and American soldiers were treated. He was heralded as a hero and a martyr in American news and is honored even today, with a monument to his name on the battlefield and a county of New Jersey bearing his name. As Mercer lay bleeding on the battlefield, his novice soldiers' resolve and organization was crumbling around him. Panicked by the loss of their leader in the charge, the men turned and ran. This was no ordered retreat of disciplined soldiers, but rather the panicked flight of prey from a predator. The battle might have been lost if not for the Philadelphia Associators, who formed once again into a line. It was an extraordinary feat for these untrained citizen soldiers to rally under heavy fire, choosing to stand and fight. In this critical moment, Washington arrived on the field with reinforcements. The men were reinvigorated at the sight of their general, and soon Mahood's troops were outnumbered and outflanked. The British broke and ran, pursued by the Continentals across the countryside. In the town itself, the 55th Foot didn't wait for the American wing led by Sullivan to attack, but advanced toward them despite being outnumbered 10-1. They were forced to surrender. American artillery defeated the British at Nassau Hall as well. Cornwallis heard the firing and ordered his troops to rush to Princeton. Anticipating this, Washington destroyed bridges and set up roadblocks, allowing his army to move off in good order towards Somerset. Cornwallis retreated to Brunswick, abandoning many posts in New Jersey. Something fundamental had changed in the thoughts of British commanders, whose focus had shifted from attacking to being attacked. In the Battle of Trenton, the British had been able to pin the blame on the Hessians. However, this time Washington had defeated not Hessians but British regulars, causing shame and embarrassment. Princeton was supremely important in destroying the illusion of British invincibility and making patriots of potential loyalists. The British resistance allowed most of the garrison to escape from Princeton to Somerset and Brunswick. They had also been successful in tiring the Continentals out, foiling Washington's plan to continue on to Brunswick. However, the British suffered heavy losses. Washington estimated there were around 100 killed, 70 wounded, and 280 taken prisoner. The Americans suffered only about 40 killed and wounded. However, this battle isn't important in the timeline of history because of how many lives were lost for the territory that was gained. The victory at Princeton did not significantly impair the British Army, but it represented a major political victory, rallying the supporters of independence and gaining international attention. It represents a turning point in the war. It shows the transformation of the Continental Army from a force of passionate citizenry to a proper army forged in the crucible of war. It marks the end of British contempt for the American ability to win the war and sparks a growing hope in the possibility of independence. The Battle of Princeton boosted morale at a critical moment where the Revolution teetered on the brink of extinction. It changed the course of the war and, by extension, the course of American history.